Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Princess Companion, a retelling of The Princess and the Pea, by Melanie Cellier, narrated by Esther Wane. The Queen. It had only been a squirrel or a deer moving through the forest, or so she told herself when she heard the noise through the trees. She tried to calm her breathing. She focused her mind on the image of his face. After all, she was doing this for him. She would do anything for her beloved son. He would not suffer like... But her mind skittered away from that thought. That wouldn't help her breathing. Finally, she calmed herself enough to recite the words she still remembered so clearly, the words that would summon help. She hadn't expected an immediate response, so was startled into an undignified yelp that she quickly stifled. Her frightened eyes sought the castle, but there were no sounds in response to her cry. She turned back to look at the creature before her. Relief. The face was still filled with the kindly wisdom she remembered. She felt for a moment the lightness that came from not being alone, from not having to be the one with the answers. "You came." "My dear child, of course I came." The Queen laughed, a low chuckle. "Hardly a child any more. In fact, I have 3 children of my own." She received a smile in response. "You still seem like a child to me. It seems only yesterday when I was—" But the Queen cut her off. "I don't want to reminisce. I need your help." It came out more sharply than she intended, so she tried again. "I've called for you because of my son. I'm concerned for him. He needs your help." Her companion looked around as if she expected to see the prince lurking behind a tree. The Queen shook her head. "He's not here. Doesn't know anything about it. But I'm desperate that he not make the same mistake as his father." This earned her a sudden, sharp look. "And we've heard rumours, the king and I. We have to be sure that the ones who come are true, that the one who's chosen is—" She paused. "The right one. Please, can you help me?" "True, you say? Her companion murmured something under her breath, and then was silent for a space. The Queen began to look anxious again. Then, with a swift movement, something small was pressed into her hand. She would have to be true indeed to feel this. Put it under the mattress. Only the right one will feel it. Under the mattress? "Oh, thank you, thank you." The Queen looked so relieved, so buoyant it seemed for a moment she was the one with wings. She clasped the hands before her. "I must go, but I'm so grateful. You are as kind as you always were." With a final smile she turned and slipped away into the darkness. Her companion didn't move but watched her go, long after she seemed to have disappeared from sight. The same mistake as his father. What is going on in that girl's head? A muddle, indeed. Well, I suppose they'll all learn something from the experience. And then suddenly she vanished. The wood was empty again, except for the silent watcher who was neither a squirrel nor a deer. The Prince. Every good story I've ever heard has involved a prince, and usually a handsome, intelligent one. Now, I have nothing against being handsome or intelligent, but I don't want my life to be a story. I want to be free to make my own choices, not to be governed by the magical whims of some godmother. Sure, I wouldn't be here at all if a godmother hadn't intervened in my parents' life, but that doesn't mean I want that for me. I'm willing to do my duty and fall in love with a princess, but I don't want magic to help me do it. I'm perfectly fine on my own. Max! Groan. Or at least I would be perfectly fine if I could ever manage to actually be on my own. This is the worst part of my father's bizarre determination to sequester us all in the middle of the forest every winter. Our winter castle is a lot smaller than our summer palace. The castle is still large by normal standards, but normal standards don't apply to twin 11-year-olds, particularly when those 11-year-olds are my sisters. I debated staying put and hoping they didn't find me, or trying to slip past them back to my room. Unfortunately, I spent too long considering my options, and they burst into the library and immediately saw me where I sat with my legs propped up in one of the window seats. "What are you doing?" My sister Lily's angelic appearance is extremely misleading. Nothing. "Well, what are you thinking about, then?" The fact that Sophie looks exactly like Lily makes them appear twice as angelic. Once again, incredibly misleading. Nothing. "You can't be thinking about nothing. That's impossible." Lily was starting to look annoyed, and I generally try to be far away when she's annoyed. "Well, I guess I was thinking about being bored." "Oh." She frowned and sat down on the floor, looking up at me. "We're bored too. What should we do?" I sighed. We'd only been at the castle for a month, and we must have had some variation of this conversation 20 times. I ran through the usual suggestions. Study, dance practice, talk to your governess, talk to mother, talk to father, talk to nanny. Each one was greeted with an eye roll from Lily and a sigh from Sophie. The nanny suggestion got 2 eye rolls and 2 sighs. I added a new suggestion on the end. "Why don't you play dress-ups? I bet Mother has some old trunks full of clothes you could use." "Really, Max? We're not 5. I now realised what I had missed at the beginning of the conversation. Lily was in a princess mood. Don't ask me what I consider synonyms for princess. I decided to get out of there quickly. "Well, you'll have to work something out for yourself, then. I have to go and help Father with some diplomatic communications." I stood on the window seat before I'd finished speaking and leaped over the twins' heads to land between them and the door. I then walked from the room as quickly as I could without actually running. After all, I'm 19 years old. Not even the world's most obnoxious twin sister could make me do something as undignified as running through the castle. Once out of the room, I slowed to a stroll and headed in the direction of my father's office. There weren't any diplomatic communications, of course, or at least none that my father would want my advice on. But I wouldn't put it past the twins to come and check if I really was with Father. They were probably mad enough with me as it was. I didn't want to spend the next week checking around corners. When I reached his office, I knocked on the door and pushed it open without waiting for an answer. I only got 1 stride into the room before I realised something was wrong. My father was almost always in this office during the day. It was his favourite retreat. My mother, on the other hand, was never here. It was a manly room, full of oak wood bookshelves stained to match the dark colour of the desk, and free of any decorations or adornments. She looked out of place sitting in one of the leather chairs across from the desk. Out of place and unsettled. My father, on the other hand, looked downright agitated. I started to back out of the room, but was stopped by my mother's voice. "Max, perfect timing. Your father and I would like to talk to you." She sounded excited, which was so far from what I was expecting that I froze, and missed my opportunity to dash from the room. I began to regret abandoning Lily and Sophie. Even entertaining 2 fiends disguised as small girls would be preferable to a talk with my parents. To clarify, a talk with one of my parents would be fine. It was my mother who told me, at the age of 8, that my parents agreed I wasn't a little child anymore, which meant I could leave Nanny in the nursery and get my own suite of rooms and a manservant to wait on me. But it was my parents together who told me that my mother was pregnant, and I was now going to have to share their attention with 2 more siblings. It was my father on his own who told me he had found the perfect thoroughbred to be my first full-sized horse, and he was the one who told me they'd bought me my own hunting lodge. But last year, my parents together told me that I couldn't spend the winter at that lodge with friends. Even at 18, I was expected to join the family in our forest hideaway. So it was with extreme reluctance that I moved forward and sat in the remaining chair. If my mother felt unsettled, she no longer showed it. Only the excitement was on display now. My father, on the other hand, appeared even more agitated, and had abandoned his usual stately calm in favour of drumming his fingers on the desk. As you know, your father and I have begun to think about your marriage. Only the memory of Lily and Sophie allowed me to hold back the sigh and eye roll. Maybe I should have just stayed in bed this morning. And you also know that it is very important to me that you marry a princess. A true princess. The slight emphasis on the true was new, but the princess theme was familiar. Yes, Mother, I replied. And you know that I'm perfectly willing to marry a princess. Which was true. Have you ever seen an ugly princess? No. They can come in the annoying variety, sure. Just look at my sisters. But they don't seem to make them in ugly. And I'd always figured a common girl was at least as likely to be annoying as a royal one. At least this way I'd be guaranteed a wife I could enjoy looking at whenever official receptions started to drag. Your father is concerned that just because a girl is a princess doesn't guarantee she'll make a good queen. Or a good wife, for that matter. I threw my father a grateful look. With any luck, I'd get a wife I could talk to as well as look at. Your father feels that we need to consider something more than just their lineage. So we've decided to invite some princesses to come for a visit, and I've come up with a test for them. At this point, if I hadn't been so busy being horrified, I would have started to question my mother's sanity. My horror must have shown because she hurried to add, just the daughters of a few of our neighbours. My horror didn't abate, so she added, not all at once, of course, one at a time. I started to breathe again. Just. Everyone accepts the fact that their parents are out of touch, but mine really seemed to have gone over the edge. A test. The suggestion was as strange as their behaviour. My father just kept looking more and more agitated, his fingers moving faster and faster. And my mother, usually the epitome of poise, had now started shooting him tense looks. I would have suspected them of being in the middle of an argument, but my parents never fight. A test? I finally managed to get out. What sort of test? And how many princess visits are we talking about? I was already trying to tally the number of balls, state dinners, and official ceremonies I would have to endure. I guess that depends how the first few visits go, my mother said with a smile. That made me realise the visits would continue until something worse happened. A wedding. I'd counted on at least another couple of years before that. When is the first one coming? Surely we could wait a couple of years before we start the parade. I could already tell from my mother's expression that things were not going to go my way. We can't afford to wait around, dear. What if it takes a couple of years to find the right princess? This is very important to the kingdom. Since you're our only son, you can't delay getting married and having sons of your own. Children? Children? This was getting worse and worse. I'm only 19, Mother. I don't exactly have one foot in the grave. Now both my parents were giving me the look, and I knew it was all over. Once duty to our kingdom of Arcadia was invoked, I didn't have a chance. Fine. When is the first princess coming? Please let it be no time soon, or at the very least after my annual hunting trip. If my winters, spent without friends, hunting or any other diversions, were the low point of my year, my annual hunting trip was the high point. I hosted all my closest friends at my lodge, and we spent every day in the saddle. With no women around, none of us stood on ceremony, and for 1 week of the year I got to forget I was a prince with royal responsibilities. As soon as we get back to the capital. But don't worry, you can have your hunting trip first. I sighed. Small mercies, I suppose. Part 1. The Winter Castle. Chapter 1. If anyone had told me a year ago that I would find true love through a pea, I would have laughed. I mean, when you live in a forest and never see anyone who isn't related to you, or at least overly obsessed with wood, it's kind of hard to see how a vegetable could lead you to love. But, of course, it wasn't just the pea. You could also say the light led me there, and in this case, that wouldn't be metaphorical. Sometimes I have good ideas, sometimes I have bad ideas, and sometimes I have colossally bad ideas. It turns out leaving the merchant camp for an evening stroll was one of the colossally bad ones. At the time, it hadn't seemed like a big deal. I just wanted to stretch my legs after a week of riding in a wagon. Even when it got dark too quickly and I discovered I'd lost my way, I didn't realize just how bad an idea it was. And then it started raining. The rain didn't reach me at first because the forest canopy was too dense. I could hear the raindrops hitting the leaves above me, though, and occasionally a fat drop amassed enough weight to push through the foliage and land on the top of my head. But I certainly wasn't wet, only starting to feel a certain dampness in the air, and an utter certainty that I had no idea which direction led to the camp. "Well, here's where your stupid pride has led you," I muttered to myself. Ariana, the merchant in whose wagon I had secured passage to Arcady, our kingdom's capital, had warned me not to go too far, but I'd been supremely confident. After all, if I didn't know the woods, I didn't know anything. Turns out I didn't know anything. In some ways, this revelation wasn't much of a surprise. I had been born in my family's remote house and had slept there every night since, except for the last 6 in the back of Ariana's wagon. Should have been paying more attention instead of daydreaming about Arcady. Eek! My recriminations turned into a particularly embarrassing shriek at a sudden clap of thunder. I instinctively looked around to check that no one had heard me. My brothers would be laughing over my fright for days. But then I remembered that my brothers weren't here. That, in fact, I was completely alone. 3 big drops fell off a branch and ran down the back of my neck, and I had to gulp and angle my face upwards to prevent an equally large tear from slipping out of my eye. As much as I love my brothers, I hadn't expected to miss them after only a week. I could picture them all clearly, sitting around our worn kitchen table or gathered around the fireplace. I wondered if they were thinking of me. Perhaps they were talking of me, or my mother was retelling her favourite story. My birth. My birth had been unspectacular, although I was instantly pronounced beautiful. This was despite the fact that I imagine I was born, like most babies, looking thoroughly displeased with the process of birth. I think my alleged beauty had a lot more to do with my being a girl than my physical appearance. It seems that after 4 boys, this was a delightful change. Some people think that being both the baby and the only girl, I must have led a spoiled life. I can only say those people clearly do not have 4 brothers. Apparently, I was only an hour old when I received my first brotherly poke. Now, a poke may not seem like much to you, but I'm told I didn't appreciate it then. After all, I'd just been through a very traumatic experience, and I still don't appreciate it now. My brothers weren't intentionally cruel, but they just could not understand that their endless pinches, pokes, and slaps truly hurt me. They would leave my arms, legs, and sides throbbing for hours. I had accepted early on that I was more physically sensitive than others, and that my pain threshold was very low, but my brothers couldn't seem to accept it. I quickly learned that outsmarting them was my only hope of living pain-free. That, or keeping them too entertained to think of harassing me. That's what got me started on storytelling. I figured if Scheherazade could keep her head attached to her shoulders with her stories, I could at least keep myself free from poking. Stories were the constant undercurrent of village life, and I discovered at a young age that I had a knack for giving old stories a new twist, and even for coming up with new ones altogether. If I carefully chose the stories I invented for my brothers, who can blame me? And if the stories tended toward the young man is polite to unlikely person who turns out to be a godmother and goes on to help him marry a rich and beautiful princess type, then all the better. My stories were more likely to involve a hedgehog princess than a frog prince, but they still ended in true love and happily ever after, as all good stories should. And if the hedgehog fell in love with a simple woodcutter after observing how lovingly he treated his mother and sisters, who could blame me? My parents approved of my storytelling because they approved of anything that kept us sitting still in a house that wasn't big enough for the rough and tumble of 4 large boys. Winter nights could be very long, And while they may have secretly agreed that I needed a little toughening up, after all, woodcutting is hardly a trade for weaklings, they very quickly lost patience with my brother's preferred methods. Thinking of those warm winter evenings and imagining my family sitting around the fire threw my current miserable situation into stark relief. "That's it, Alyssa," I thought sternly. "No more messing around trying to find the camp. The woods are crisscrossed with roads. Pick a direction and start walking. Once you find a road, you only have to follow it, and eventually you'll find some sort of shelter." By now, more and more drops were making it through the canopy, so I started moving at a sort of shuffling jog, trying to cover as much ground as possible while not ending up flat on my face in the dark. It was hard to tell how much time had passed, but I thought it must have been nearly an hour, and I still hadn't found a road. Luckily, the ground was fairly flat. I had good stamina as long as I wasn't going uphill. I had also stayed warm for the first half of my walk, thanks to my movement and my warm cloak. The cloak had been a farewell gift from my mother, and was the most beautiful thing I had ever owned. It had been a wedding present, put away in a cupboard as too fine for everyday use. It was much better quality than any of my other clothes. But the rain now crashed through the trees, and I was thoroughly drenched, shivering violently and with an ache in my eyes and head from the constant strain of trying to see through the darkness. I had been talking fairly sternly to myself the whole way, but was still feeling uncomfortably close to desperation when I finally saw the light. It was just a flicker, swallowed up by the trees almost immediately, but I changed my direction to veer toward it anyway. Any port in a storm, they say, and this was rapidly becoming a very bad storm. The wind was picking up, and I could hear branches creaking in the most ominous manner possible. The thought of a branch, or even a tree, falling and pinning me underneath it, leaving me trapped and in pain for endless hours, made me swallow back a sob and start to move faster. After only a minute I saw the light again, and this time it steadied, beckoning me forward. Now that I could see somewhat, I began to run, and I found that the trees ended just ahead of me. I had soon run out from under the leaves and begun crossing a large garden, the rain almost blinding me with its force. I could spare only a quick glance upwards to see what I was running toward, my attention focused on my feet in an attempt not to slip and fall. I approached a stone building, far larger than any I had seen before, but it was hard to make out any details through the rain. Sheltered, as I had been in my village, I still knew there was only one building this could be. The Royal Winter Castle. Normally, I wouldn't have dreamed of approaching it, but now I didn't even hesitate as I ran toward the large wooden front doors. When I reached them, I lifted the heavy bronze door knocker and gave several hard knocks against the door. Unfortunately, these perfectly coincided with one of the loudest, longest cracks of thunder yet. As soon as the thunder faded away, I lifted the knocker and rapped again, even more enthusiastically. I tried to listen for the sounds of footsteps inside, but the rain drummed down too hard, and I no longer had even the minimal protection of the trees. I huddled right up against the door, trying to shield myself with the tiny overhang. This turned out to be another bad idea when the door was at last wrenched open, causing me to stumble forward into the entryway. I would have fallen if the footman who opened the door hadn't caught me. For a second, all I could take in was the blissful warmth. Then I looked around and observed a large stone entryway. The only light came from a lantern being held by the footman, so I couldn't see the whole space. As he closed the door behind me, I observed a cold stone floor and impressive stairs that broke off halfway up the flight to curve in opposite directions. A red carpet ran up the middle of the stairs and probably along the gallery at the top. I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the gallery and strained my eyes, trying to make out some more welcoming person than the footman who was now staring at me in silent surprise. But the movement was gone, and I was distracted by the realization that it wasn't as warm inside as I had first supposed. I began to shiver violently. "Who are you?" The footman had finally found his voice and asked the question with equal amounts of surprise and disgust in his voice. I instinctively stiffened. My parents had always impressed on me the importance of being polite, and if courtesy was taught in a woodcutter's cottage, surely it was taught in a castle. I determined to show him a polite way to address a complete stranger. "My name is Alyssa. I'm so sorry to have disturbed you. I was separated from my group and caught in the storm. I must beg a place to shelter for the night." He seemed mildly impressed by my manner, and I congratulated myself on having given him such a gentle and much-needed lesson in manners. "I guess I'd better get Dawkins." His eyes lingered on the embroidered border of my cloak. This statement made no sense whatsoever to me, but at least it was said in a friendlier tone. "That would be appreciated, thank you," I said, still determined to be polite. But when the footman began to walk away, I felt some stirrings of alarm. I took a couple of steps to follow him, but he quickly turned back around. "You stay here. You can't go tracking that all through the house." He pointed at the pile of water where I'd been standing. "But you can't leave me here," I gasped, my eyes focused on his lantern. "Oh, right." He turned to fumble around in an alcove next to the door. When he swung back toward me, he was holding a lit candle in a bronze candle holder. He held the candle out to me, and I gratefully accepted it. This time, when he turned to leave, I stayed in place, still shivering and hoping he would return quickly, preferably with a warm blanket. I looked around the entryway again, trying to distract myself from the cold. Tapestries hung on the walls, and a large fireplace filled the wall to my left, next to the door that the footman had disappeared through. But I couldn't make out the details of anything. It was much too dark with only a candle. A noise pulled my attention back up toward the gallery. Perhaps there was someone there, after all. But the light of the candle was too weak to reach that far, so I couldn't be certain. I was just debating whether or not I should call out to my potential company when I heard a louder sound of movement from my left. Before I had time to do anything other than turn around, a tall, middle-aged and solemn-looking man came through the doorway and moved toward me. He also carried a lantern, and was trailed by the footman, who now looked rather sheepish. The tall man gave me a swift glance up and down, taking in my bedraggled state, and then, to my surprise, gave a slight bow and spoke. "I am Dawkins, Their Majesty's butler. I apologize for your reception. We weren't expecting you." He paused here as if he was waiting for me to say something, so I said, "Thank you. I don't want to be any trouble. I simply need some hospitality for the night." "Of course. If you will follow me. I've already sent the housekeeper ahead to prepare the room." "Thank you," I said again, this time with more feeling. I expected him to turn back toward the doorway to the left, but he began to walk toward the stairs. I followed him, and the footman would have followed me if Dawkins hadn't gestured for him to go back the way they had come. Once he had disappeared from sight, Dawkins seemed to unbend a little, and even smiled graciously at me. Some of my nervous energy began to dissipate, and my feet started to drag a little. I was so very cold and tired. When we reached the break in the stairs, Dawkins led me up the left branch and then down the left gallery. As we walked, he said, "My apologies for the footman. Naturally, he is not in their Majesty's confidence, and cannot be expected to handle anything out of the ordinary." I didn't reply to this, as I couldn't think of a single thing to say. What did being in their Majesty's confidence have to do with anything? His words reminded me that it was winter, and the royal family must be in residence at the castle. I began to wonder if I had committed some huge social solecism by coming to the front door. Luckily, Dawkins didn't seem to expect a response, but stopped and opened one of the doors lining the gallery to our right. He gave another bow and gestured for me to precede him into the room. I did so, and was surprised to hear the door click shut behind me. I whipped around, but Dawkins was gone, and I faced only a closed wooden door. I slowly turned back around to survey the room, and confused apprehension swept over me. The chamber was large and sumptuously furnished. Across from the door, a row of windows was hidden behind thick red velvet curtains. A set of armchairs also...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?